Hello, everyone. Welcome to COEX Talk. Today we have a very special friend, Zach, who is also my coworker at the National Park Service. Zach, welcome. We're very happy and excited to hear more about permaculture and anything else you want to share with us. So thank you for being here, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. To give a little bit of context of who I am. For me, identity is a very kind of important thing and part of the journey that's led me to permaculture. And so I grew up in the Midwest of the United States. My mother's family is many generations from Wisconsin, the land of snow and cold. And my dad's side of the family, grandparents' generation and on, immigrated from central Mexico, Guanajuato, to other parts of the Midwest. So really jumped around the Midwest a lot, and very grateful to have been outside for pretty much all of that time growing up. I cannot be more thankful to the atmosphere my parents have put me in, maybe not intentionally or maybe intentionally, but to let nature be one of the biggest teachers in my life, which I didn't realize till a little bit later down the road. But I ended up going to school, getting my bachelor's degree in environmental biology, so basically ecology, in a small town on the Mississippi River in Minnesota. And that kind of started to launch me in the direction of permaculture. I wouldn't have said by any means at that point that that's what my life was about. Not yet, anyways.
Let me ask you quickly, how did you get interested in biology?
Honestly, the simplest way to explain that is I was crazy about dinosaurs growing up. And at some point I made the connection in my brain somewhere in high school that, wow, dinosaurs, or the study of dinosaurs, paleontology, is kind of like geology. They're dead. And I really like live animals. So biology was the second best choice. Specifically, I really wanted to get into wildlife biology, which I have yet to really do that as a profession, but it led me with the right interests to study them, to expose myself to things, I suppose. Yeah.
So going back to your career,
yeah. So, getting undergrad in biology gave me a great base of science. And when I say science, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog, but of science, because I say that in a weird way, possibly because science is such a gift to us, right? It's it helps us understand the world we live in, but also it comes from a certain cultural perspective, and it can help in some ways, and I don't want to say hinder. I'm not trying to say it hinders in other ways, but it trains our mind to think in one way. And so I am ever so grateful to have that base, to think scientifically, to think about research and the scientific process of why we understand things. But what really led me into more of, I guess, the earth sciences, or the relationship of human with that science, right? Instead of me just studying this frog, oh, it's an amphibian, X, Y, and Z happens because of these scientific reasons. The reason I started kind of branching out from that and looking within myself and how I relate to science was I had the opportunity to study abroad when I was in college, to Quito, Ecuador. And I got placed with an internship with an organization called Las Guardianas de la Red de Semillas. It's basically like a big seed network, seed bank across Ecuador and Colombia. And quite a diverse group. I forget how many seed varieties they had in their bank. It was somewhere around 10,000.
Oh my God.
So the idea was to preserve a lot of these native seeds or species, but varieties of them that humans have been evolving alongside these plants, these food plants, for so long. And I learned so so much. You know, I grew up doing a little bit of gardening. My mom would say, "I'll go water the garden." I'd be like, oh, okay, sure. But really being able to connect. So I was working basically on a kind of sustainable farm, organic farm, which was awesome experience, you know, learning all the basics of how to provide sustenance, to provide food in that setting. But the caveat to that is every couple days a month, they would send me out into the mountains with these local gentlemen that only spoke Quechua, not Quechua from Peru, but Quechua, which is kind of the indigenous language in that area. And they would build super adobe houses, earth bag houses. And my Spanish, I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. I had to learn or relearn through the generations that part of my family had lost. But it was all right at that point in time, very conversational. But these guys didn't really speak much Spanish. They pretty much only spoke Quechua. So it was a
Did you learn Quechua?
Minimally, because like I said, it was only a couple days, like a month. And then I'd go out and like work all day, and you know, some words, they were super friendly. I mean, it was pretty easy to like give me a pick and like go over there and, you know, do that for a while.
Sign language.
Yeah, sign language. Humans communicate surprisingly well without speaking the same language.
Yeah.
But that opened my eyes. I mean, that transformed what my concept of what architecture can be, or what, you know, housing can be. But I never really learned much of the specifics. It was just like what I could observe with my eyes, essentially. And that kind of ignited the fire. I wrapped up that study abroad internship classes, learned so much, love the country of Ecuador, people of Ecuador. But essentially that brought me back to the States to finish up my undergrad, kind of with a desire for a little bit more. So as soon as I graduated, I drew some applications out for Peace Corps and was pretty quickly sent to Paraguay for a little over 2 years as an agricultural Peace Corps volunteer.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And at this point in time, I've heard of permaculture. So the word is in there. I don't know a ton about it, but I know it's cooler than just gardening. And this was one of the few countries in Peace Corps that kind of place you with what they think is your best fit. That mentioned in like just a 1-page description. It's like, this is what you're going to do for 2 years. Here's a page to describe it. And it mentioned permaculture in there. And that was pretty exciting to me. Not that I had the choice where they really sent me, but I was pretty happy that that's how it turned out. And I owe so much to my Peace Corps experience and the people of Paraguay, because, you know, Peace Corps gets such a rep of like, wow, you're doing so much good for the world. You know, good job, you. Ideally, you do a lot, and I feel pretty proud of what I was able to give in that time. But what I learned about the world, about specific technical skills, and about myself, to me, way outweighs what I could ever give. Yeah, and I think that kind of lines up with why I joined without knowing it. I was just like kind of struggling being in the U.S., just kind of society-wise and my identity. I just felt like I needed to get out. And South America always treated me so well. As Peace Corps volunteers, you come in with experience, you get trained on experience that pertains to that ecosystem, to that climate, to that culture, and then you live it, you teach it, you spread it, you are part of it. And Paraguay is a country It's one of the 2 landlocked countries in South America. It's pretty big, but only has 7 million people as population, 7 million something. So like the size of, I don't know, Chicago.
Wow.
So it's very rural agricultural country, and that was amazing. I loved it. I mean, you live agriculture there. Unless you're in one of the few cities, everybody is growing things. Everybody's raising animals. Everybody's has a connection directly with their food source. And generally that source is like right up front, out your door. So that, I'll get into this once we dive into permaculture, but that's kind of the culture part of
Okay.
permaculture, that it's, you know, it's, we're not just talking about agriculture here. We're talking about relationships. And that's when I really started to realize this, that, you know, these people didn't look at it as like a hobby. Here's my garden. Here's, you know, my tomato plant. What is my relationship with that? And so it's something that's so profound that explaining it in words sometimes is kind of challenging. But essentially I was able to develop a ton of technical knowledge, you know, and experience of in the agricultural field, as well as in the permaculture lifestyle, as well as kind of figure out my identity a bit more and figure out, you know, what I wanted as a human being.
So what are kind of like the key components to permaculture?
Right. So I didn't really want to share a ton of images and do presentations, but I could share one.
Okay. Let me.
I think. What I do want to share with you today is like a little bit about permaculture and all the, you know, the details of the science of permaculture. But really today, I'd rather share my experience with you. And even more importantly, like if there's anything anybody who's watching this can take home, is what is possible. Because, you know, talking about permaculture, even just talking about, for some people, starting a garden can be super intimidating. And especially if you're working a full-time job. Let's say you live in El Paso or Chicago or in a city, you know, these things can be really daunting, whether it's knowledge, whether it's time, whether it's money to do these. So what I really want to try to drive home is that you can do this. You can totally do this. So if you can see the screen here, it says relation to principles. And a lot of people will call this, and there's different images of it, but the permaculture flower, they'll actually like draw it as a flower, or the permaculture wheel, or the principles of permaculture essentially. And in the center, you'll see care for the earth, care for people, and fair share. And essentially why it's drawn in a circular shape is that there is no beginning, there is no end. You can think of Lion King, the circle of life. It's literally that. We are in one system. Humans are in that system. The air is in that system. The trees are in that system. Everything is in that system. So we can't pretend like one action doesn't affect something else. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
And so permaculture itself, I believe some people say this isn't where it comes from, but I think most people collectively decide that permaculture means permanent culture. And so sometimes that can be a little confusing because we all have kind of different interpretations of what culture means. Maybe you guys, just for context, want to share like what culture means to you in like a super brief way?
Right now?
Yeah.
I don't know. Culture.
I mean, it doesn't have to be your culture, but just like what the word culture means.
I don't know. It's like
a set of beliefs that comes from like a group of people, kind of.
Yeah, totally.
You have a lot of different traditions, and you share kind of those types of beliefs with them. Sometimes they're even automatic. because you don't even think about them anymore.
Right. It's like ingrained in yourself.
Yeah.
Stuff that connects humans together, groups of people together.
Yeah, I like that.
Sometimes also like certain practices and histories, because Christmas right now, I've been struggling a little bit because I feel like it's the practices that we do are not sustainable, but it's still a tradition. So it's still something we share as a culture. But I don't know if that made sense. But
Yeah, well, I think that you guys are perfectly like portraying this because those are all super true things, but there's no like concrete answer. You know, culture is like this transforming movement of like how people interact with each other and our world, or our atmosphere, our environment, I suppose. So you probably gave better definitions than I would. But so the idea of permanent culture is basically just the play on words of sustainability, right? You know, something that will last, that will be permanent, essentially, right? Or intentionally be around for a while. And so kind of going back to that idea of permanent culture, these are basically just principles. They're guidelines of how we can describe that, right? I like to start with the tree. You can see like on the top right is one that's observed and interact. And I think that is one of the most important things, because that can really dictate all of these other principles to us. Like I said, when I was growing up, nature was the best teacher to me, and still is. I don't want to say that as a past tense kind of a thing. We can learn so much from nature just by observing and just by interacting. And that's where I kind of was talking about science being, I never want to talk negatively about science, but it can train us to think in certain ways that might hinder other ways that we think. And I don't know if anybody's read a book called Braiding Sweetgrass out there. I think Maria might have.
no.
No, maybe I mentioned it too. But beautiful book. I recommend it to anybody, Braiding Sweetgrass. But it talks about how, as scientists or people trained in science, that we observe things, right? And we interact with things. We take data, we research for a function to learn things. But what science kind of leaves out is that we, as the observer, are part of the scientific experiment. We have emotions, we have feelings that interact with whatever we might be studying, that also produces a result. And basically what I'm getting at is that we are a part of this circle. This isn't a circle and then humans are on the outside. We are very much in it. And so by observing and interacting and essentially paying attention, we can learn so much. And I tell you that as a educational interpretive park ranger.
I'm glad you're mentioning or emphasizing on the fact that we're not like outside or inside, we're in it, because I feel like a lot of us have felt like, or I've read like, oh, humans, like they feel like they don't belong in the ecosystem or the natural world, but we're much part of it as well. You know what I mean?
Exactly. We are, you know, we have a scientific name to explain our species, you know, Homo sapien. You know, we're included in the science, but we view it from the outside. There's something that has always helped guide me understand that, because it's so easy to view things from the outside, because that's kind of how, you know, that's how our system works. I grew up, like I said, in the Midwest around Lake Superior, and the local tribe, being able to grow up around tribal people, tribal friends, tribal members, but also later in my life work for the national park up there and help kind of educate about that cultural history. But anyways, they had a saying, or as I used to say, that it's, you know, if we tried to directly translate wilderness, you know, there's so many different ways. We actually have a legal term with the Park Service or with public lands, what wilderness is. You can't take wheeled things into it. You know, there's certain laws that protect wilderness. you know, depending on who you ask what wilderness is, they're going to give you a different answer, right? But generally it's looking at wilderness from the outside. Am I wrong on that?
No, I'm like learning.
Right. Sorry. I just.
Sorry, I forget that I mute myself.
No worries.
Oh man, I'm talking and I'm muted.
Yeah, so it's just like, you know, we view the wilderness from the outside, but within the Ojibwe language, you know, the closest translation of wilderness was Gakina Wija, which means we're all related, which, you know, if you quickly think about it, it's like, how does that translate? You know, that's a phrase, but it's the viewpoint that, you know, we're all in this circle together, like we and the trees and the plants and the animals, we're all in this life thing together, and humans aren't excluded from any of the rules that we play by. So the first one is observe and interact, and then it jumps to catch and store energy. And some of these are pretty straightforward, right? The idea is to take energy. So if we can imagine our circle is here and we're hanging out in the circle, let's say this circle, we can break it down into different sizes as well. Let's say it's the piece of property that I occupy, you know, whether you're renting that, whether you own it, whether you're boondocking somewhere. For example, I live on 2.5 acres here just outside of Bisbee, Arizona, between the Mule Mountains and Sonora, Mexico. So catching and store energy would be bringing things from outside of this smaller circle into my circle. And so catching it, whether it's sun, whether it's water, whether it's nutrients, and storing it. So storing it means keeping it here, right? And so jumping to the next one, obtain a yield. This one, I'm still working on what it means to me, but essentially I understand it as being intentional. You know, a yield is, you know, using some of those benefits of science and mathematics and realizing what you're producing and making sure that's worth it. Are you spending your energy in a place that needs to be spent? So the next one is self-regulate and accept feedback. And self-regulate is pretty straightforward, but it's looking in, it's constantly looking in. It's not growing and assuming we're always becoming better, which many times we are gaining experience, gaining knowledge, but it's giving ourselves that check. And so in the sense of, you know, permaculture, it's accepting feedback because it is an integration with nature. You know, maybe that feedback is nature telling you something and we're not quite listening. And sometimes we got to listen. All right. So next one is use and value renewables. That one's pretty straightforward, right? Renewable energy, sun, it's not burning out, hopefully anytime soon. That's pretty renewable. You know, depending on your climate and your ecosystem, this is going to change though, right? What resources are available? What resources can you sustainably use and harvest that aren't going to affect your ecosystem or affect that specific resource? And what resources may need to be restored, right? Regenerated to sustainable populations before you can start using them again, right? So each of these are pretty complex in their own, and I just want to jump over them quick because I don't expect anybody to memorize this because I don't even have it memorized. That's why I have a picture of it up here. The next one is produce no waste. And so the term waste is also a cultural perspective, right? You know, what is waste? I've heard people talk about they rake up their little yard and all the leaves there is waste.
Yeah.
You know, is it waste? If we're looking at, you know, Lion King's Circle of Life, you know, that stuff doesn't belong in a garbage bag, a plastic bag that gets sent off to a landfill, right? It'll eventually break down there. But the idea of produce no waste is to produce things that don't get cycled through the system, or at least don't get cycled through it in our human time frame.
Zach, actually the waste there would be the plastic bag.
Yeah. So a lot of plastics, right? And a lot of these are, you know, that's not an easy task. easy to say, oh, I'm not going to use plastics, or I'm not going to use petroleum, or things like that. But, you know, the idea is to strive for some of these things. And sometimes it's, you know, picking your battles. What is the lesser harm, or what can I do that is a small action that, you know, isn't great, you know, using plastics, but I can produce all these amazing benefits out of it for myself, for my circle, for the environment. So that one's a little bit complicated when you really break it down. I like that they have a worm on it though.
Yeah.
Breaking things down. The next one's great, especially if you're kind of a detail or design oriented thinker, is design from pattern to detail. So basically observing natural patterns, natural functions, and then applying them to how we live, instead of completely thinking, oh, humans aren't part of nature. Doesn't really matter what nature does. I'm going to try to live my life, design my town, design my space around what I think's best, regardless of how that affects nature. And so an example of that could be, you know, looking at the forest decomposition cycle, and how some of the best topsoil on the earth can be found in like temperate forests. You know, if you go in the forest, dig under those leaves, pull up some of that topsoil, it's like this black gold. It smells so good. It's like, how come my garden doesn't smell like that? So it's taking a look at all the steps that the forest does on its own. Nobody's dumping money into that forest to make some of the best soil ever. And then say, oh, how can I replicate that? How can I create that pattern on my property, in my garden? You know, looking at what the shade, the moisture, all of the, you know, the small organisms that are playing in the role to break down all of this organic matter and produce super beautiful soil.
So there is a really cool example. There's this very famous house by Frank Lloyd Wright, Falling Water. And just briefly going back to the design and how you can make a pattern out of nature. He designed this house in like a hilly mountain, beautiful site, complicated. A creek passes by it. It's incredible. But when they were painting the house, they were having a lot of problems because he was very particular on all the little details. And one day he was at the site. He spent enough time on the site, summer, winter, fall, all the seasons, saw all the changing colors. And suddenly he went on fall, picked a leaf, and he painted the house the color of the leaf. So that's how he made the decision for that house. Because you see it and you're like,
that's really cool story.
What a peculiar color. But if you go there in fall, it blends with the colors of the landscape.
So I'm going to jump through these last ones pretty quick. Integrate, which is pretty straightforward, is, you know, integrating things together instead of categorizing things and keeping them separate. That understanding that all things do blend together and do work together in some way or another. Use small, slow solutions. This one I battle with a lot. Sometimes I see how much stuff I want to accomplish, how much, you know, the goals I want to achieve, and I see time as an obstacle, which is something I really struggle with, especially living in this country and working a full-time job. So understanding that nature sometimes works in very slow ways. You know, if you're a geologist, you super duper understand that. But as biology, things do take time. I'm running 3 years here on our small little homestead we got going here, and some things have taken crazy transformations in that time, and some are such in a slow crawl still to getting to where we want them. So that's kind of what that's looking at. And then the next one is use and value diversity. And diversity is, especially if there's any, you know, biologists, ecologists out there looking at this, you know, we know that diversity, or even sociologists, you know, people looking at diversity of humans. Diversity of anything generally produces better, what am I trying to say? Not results, but a more diverse,
More abundance.
more abundance, right? More options, more ways to look at things, to do things. So essentially, yeah, it gives us options, as well as, you know, if you look at the aesthetic side of things, it makes life beautiful. We're not looking at the same things all the time. So the diversity is huge when it comes to permaculture, and we can take a peek at that a little bit more. And then the second last one is use edges, value the marginal. So that, again, you know, ecologists will super know this, like the edge of the forest where it meets the plains, or the edge of the desert valley where it meets the mountains. Those are some of the most biodiverse places, right? Because it has the option of diversity. It has more options to be awesome, to be great. And then the last one is creatively use and respond to change. And that one is pretty big. I'd really like to stress that one, because change, you know, is something that's always happened, especially when you spend a lot of time in the natural world. There's so many things that can be unpredictable, and to creatively use that is the big part. It's so easily be discouraged, especially if you're starting, even with a garden. Let's say you're planting a raised bed outside, and what do you know, some insects come along and munch it all down, or whatever can happen. It's so easy to be discouraged, and to not necessarily know how to respond to that, and be turned off by things. And so to creatively use some of these negative things, which sometimes change feels negative, we can build from that. We can learn from that. I would say some of our biggest ways we grow in the journey of understanding this world is through probably negative things happening to us or our community or our area. I'm sure most people could attest to that. So before I want to take that and really look more at, you know, what I'm trying to do, what me, my wife, and my 1-year-old daughter are trying to do, is stress that permaculture is, more than anything, it's a philosophy. You know, most people, you hear about it in the context of agriculture. Yes. So much of agriculture is a part of permaculture, because so much of being alive, of being a human, of being a large mammal on this planet is, where are you going to get your food from? How are you going to sustain your body? How are you going to stay alive, right? So, of course, agriculture is a huge part of that. But what permaculture ultimately is a philosophy. It's a way of training your mind. And by making it a reality is the action part of it. And that really rounds about, you know, all the ways humans are alive. You know, what are the needs of humans? We need to eat food, we need clean water, we need shelter, right? There's other parts that come with it, right? There's spirituality, there's the need for arts, you know, there's a lot of things that can nourish us, but the basics are those kind of things. And that's the easiest way to wrap your mind around permaculture, is kind of taking those head on. And so for me, the best way to explain it, in my understanding, because I learned through experience, I think most of us do, you know, we could study some of these big books on permaculture. You can actually go get a certification. You could be a permaculture design certification. You can go to a bunch of workshops. These are all awesome things, but a big part of it is getting your hands in the ground and kind of taking it back to being just another biological creature on this planet. So the best way to explain that is what, like I said, my family's doing here in southeastern Arizona. And part of it is what we're intending to do, or what our vision is, because it is a process. It's not easy. And like I said, what I really want to share with anybody watching this is, even though Anna is taking amazing notes and learning so much, is that this is doable. This is totally doable, and it's a process and a journey. You know, whether it's just planting a plant tomorrow in a pot and raising it to give you, I don't know, a tomato or whatever it may be. That's step one. That truly is, because that is the relationship you're developing with your little tomato, that you get so sad if it doesn't produce a tomato.
It is sad.
It's sad. It really is sad. Yeah. So like I said, we live here just outside of Bisbee, Arizona. And I like to start, instead of with names and political designations, what the ecosystem is that we live in. We live in the Madre and Sky Islands, which are pretty much half and half split between Sonora, Mexico, and southeastern Arizona, a little bit into New Mexico. And basically they're these high mountain, small mountain ranges, medium-sized mountain ranges that come out of the high desert, and even in some cases the low desert, between the Sonoran Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert, kind of where they meet. And it kind of joins in a weird way, in like island hopping kind of a way, the Colorado Plateau and the Sierra Madres in Mexico. And I like to kind of portray that, even though it's kind of probably difficult to imagine this place if you haven't been here, is because understanding our ecosystem in our bioregion, in our climate, in our geographical region, in our watersheds is really important to understanding, you know, how to live. You know, you ask a bird, they know how to live, they're probably going to tell you yes in their own way. They understand where they live. So it's really important for us, you know, whether it's really scientific way of understanding where we live, or just by spending time and observing, you know, what happens during this season, what flowers are flowering at this month, you know, where's the wind coming from, all those kind of things. So anyways, we live in the Madre and Sky Islands. And so it's a high desert climate. We're a couple miles into the valley outside of the mountains. It's pretty cold tonight. I'm actually I don't know if you can, where's my finger? Anyways, there's an open spot there. It's in a house, but it's not closed up yet. So we get cold winters, we get snow sometimes, but then we get hot desert summers, right? We get about 20 inches of rain. It's kind of lush as far as desert goes, especially once you get in the mountains. We get a lot of animals and plants from the Madrean ecosystem from Mexico, which is amazing. I love learning about it as much as I can. But we have a beautiful amount of resources, and that's kind of what I'm getting into, because if we start looking at, okay, I'm going to live here, I'm going to occupy this space of land, what do I need to live? You know, what do I need on the daily? What do I need to be comfortable? What do I need to, you know, to know that I'm going to be a happy human being? Because that's part of it. You know, if I'm going to set up a tent and eat, I don't know, oatmeal every day, like that's not sustainable either, because I'm going to go crazy. So it's knowing, you know, what your goals are, what's your comfortability, knowing a little bit about yourself. Granted, you're going to learn a lot about yourself in the process. And so for us, arid climate, desert, you know, humans have been building with Earth for a long time here. And there's a reason for that. And so I've always been in love with adobe. You mentioned that, is it Anna that lives in adobe house? Someone on this talk lives. Okay, cool.
Can't wait to go to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to hearing about it sometime. It's a special feeling, right? Earth, you can live within the earth, and humans, you know, have been doing that because of the climate and also because of the resources. And so, you know, not trying to get technical in here, but this, what is behind me is, you know, by weight, this is probably like 99 point, I don't know, some percentage earth. It, you know, you can't see it because it's in these like sandbag like things, which is a specific architectural style. But the idea, the choice was to build, how can we build with our, you know, economic situation? How can we build with a resource that is local, that's not going to do harm by using this resource? And And how can we do something that's realistic, you know, without having to pay? I mean, even if you aren't going to do the work yourself, you can still pay other people to do sustainable things, right? I'm not saying that everything has to be you go out and bleed and sweat and create a place, right? That's not always a reality. And so finding what is realistic. And I, by chance, happen to love like doing manual labor and all those kind of things and shoveling earth endlessly. So this was a really reasonable sense for us to build a house out of earth. And so that's kind of looking at it on the shelter side of things, right? But with shelter comes energy, right? As humans, we, in this modern society, we're so used to living in certain ways, which that's fine, right? There's a lot of you know, visions of sustainability and still being able to, you know, by chance, you know, have a smartphone or be able to do these things and still try to be in a sustainable system. But the energy is, as one of those bullets, the principles on the circle, is capturing and storing energy, right? So that doesn't mean you have to get your electricity from the sun or from wind, right? It's more of understanding where your energy is coming from, because permaculture, like I said, is bringing that circle down to my spot. So my 2.5 acres, where's that energy coming from, right? I got to charge my phone. I need to cook some food. I need to do these things, right? The list is endless of all the daily things we need to do to make us, you know, happy, functional human beings that are alive. And so the idea is, if I'm bringing that energy from somewhere else, is it coming from a coal plant, you know, 500 miles away? Is it coming from, you know, whatever system, whatever thing is producing that energy and sending it here? There could be a chance that that could be sustainable, but it's definitely worth knowing that, right? Because there are systems. Not everything has to be produced a million times. You know, communities can join together to produce things. And so what I'm getting at is just, you know, if we're looking at water, electricity, you know, most people have gas or some way of cooking, heating water, those kind of things, is looking at where your things are coming, right? Because are you bringing things into your property, into your life, into your apartment, into your house, whatever it may be? And then what happens? Are they going off into the atmosphere? Are they going into a sewer system and then leaving your area? Are they going into a garbage bag and then going into a landfill? These are all the energy flow parts that make up human shelter, essentially. And so an example of that is, we've been living like 2.5 years. We are purely solar, no grid tie. We are hooked up to city water, which has been very helpful. Is not ideal because it's pulling out of a huge, huge well that a company has a massive water tank on in a desert climate, right? Mm-hmm. We're part of the San Pedro River watershed. The river is constantly lower than it ever should be. And just in general, our water tables are going down, right? Especially in the desert. The desert's just getting drier and drier. And so the idea is, well, if I'm pulling all this water up from way down below, you know, how is that affecting something else, right? As opposed to, well, what about this beautiful water that we do get on a normal year? You know, what's happening to it? How can I look at my land? Is it just raining really hard? And do I have a bunch of pavement or sidewalks or, you know, just a grass lawn, and then it's all running to my neighbor's yard or into a storm drain that runs somewhere else? And what's happening to that, right? Or could I capture that water, or could I landscape and manicure my property and where that water actually slows down and filters into the soil and nourishes plants that could provide food sources for me, or food sources for birds, for wildlife? So that's kind of one side of things, right? And the other side of water is, well, what are my water consumptions? What am I using water for, right? I need to drink, of course. That's super important. But what else do we use water for? We take baths, right? We wash our clothes. We go to the bathroom using potable water, which is pretty questionable concept in, if you asked a lot of countries in Africa or other places that we use drinking water to produce what we call waste. Well, there are other ways to look at that, right? We've been using a compost toilet for over 2 years. I've been using them for like 5 years now. In our new house, when I'm in right now, we're building compost toilets. And essentially that is a dry bathroom that takes the science, the magical science of decomposition of compost, and breaks down human waste back into nutrients that can give more energy back to your property, right? And so what I'm trying to get at is kind of that this cycle starts happening between all of your needs and all of the energy that you're trying to not bring in, or maybe in the beginning you need to bring a lot of energy in, but then that energy stays there. You're cycling it, right? You're using that energy to power things that you need. And so food, whether it's plant food or animal food, is a huge part of that. I have immense respect for vegetarians and veganism. But animals are, at least in a traditional sense, a big part of that human cycle, and they are very helpful in keeping that cycle going. They eat plants, they eat grass, they eat things that can turn that into another substance that can be used by a plant that we can eat. They produce fertilizers. They can be, back in the day, a horse was a tractor, those kind of things, right? So the idea is to use all of these individual things and roles to be able to integrate with one another, to be able to build a system that is based off of reciprocity. That's the word I'm looking for. That you take and give, and sometimes you take more, and sometimes you give less, but at some point you got to give more, and sometimes you got to give less, right? It's all about finding a balance.
This has been a very interesting conversation, and you really got me to think, because I was one of those persons that I have read about permaculture before and been fascinating about the topic, and been trying to plant and grow stuff, been working on a community garden, trying to do sustainable agriculture, and was thinking about permaculture very much into like growing stuff. But you definitely gave me a perspective, like very personal perspective, that it is, as you said, it's more like a philosophy of living. And I think at the end of the day, we're all part of nature, and we all have that within us. So,
I totally agree.
as you were speaking, I was like, all my dreams, because one thing is to say, oh, I wanted, my dream is to live off the grid, but why do I want to live off the grid? And I think that's what permaculture is the reason why we want these things.
Right. Absolutely. It's kind of finding that part inside yourself. It's bringing the philosophy part to the sciences.
So I want to give Claudia, Anna, and Ale some time to say something or ask final questions before we wrap up this conversation.
Well, you actually opened my eyes to like a lot. I don't have questions yet because I still have a lot to kind of like process in my brain. So hopefully we can have you back to talk a little bit more about this. But I mean, I thought it was all about agriculture, like it was all about growing stuff. But I kind of thank you for kind of moving my thinking of that, and kind of understanding that it's kind of like compilation of a lot of things. So I also wanted to like applaud you for like having you and your family like doing this specific thing where you're doing all of this in order for a greater good, not just for your family, but for the environment as well. I wish more of us could be like you and your family. It's hard even to recycle in my house. So kudos to you, your wife, you're even like just educating your 1-year-old in this. I think it's very, very like just applauded, and I truly can say I honor what you do and the time that you are actually giving us to make us understand this a lot better.
Was saying that really kind of basically what you're saying there kind of clicked that in my mind, is that, you know, if we understand the sciences of the ecosystem and how humans interact in that, and we come to the determination that, you know, my actions are affecting the planet in a negative way, and our thought process, which is very dark, is like, well, you know, I'm making the planet worse. Like, me being a human is a bad thing. You know, that's a very destructive mindset. When we can think about it the other way with permaculture, is that you can actually take a piece of land, you know, even if it's in the city, and make it not only like negative, like neutral, you know, like, oh, I'm not causing damage, but you can actually make it cause
beneficial,
beautiful things to happen and great things for the planet.
Yeah. I want to create beautiful things for the planet.
Hey, Zach, I just wanted to share that I had an experience. I went to it's kind of like a convention called Consejo de Visiones.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy calls upon a lot of people from all over the world, and let's say that each year they have a different topic. So 2 years ago, it was called El Llamado del Agua, and the calling of the water. And that it was to make conscious in the people that we were there about the water. So we had the opportunity to live in a tiny little community in Bacalar, and everything was based on permaculture. So I totally get it, because we actually had to build with I don't know how to say it, bioconstruction elements. We had to build like stairs, a kitchen, the toilets, and I mean, it was a whole week of working. We didn't plant any food just because it was not enough time, but we technically built like a teepee, so it was like the spiritual part, and then it was like the kids part, and then the kitchen, and everybody had to share like their abilities in there. There were conferences every day, and you know, they were talking about this since like day one until the last day, and the importance of becoming one with nature, and not just like be living in a city without conscious. And when I came back, I was like, I told my son went with me to that trip. It was like a 3-week trip. And I'm like, no, you're peeing at outside. Like sometimes I pee outside too. So he technically pees outside. And I don't care, you know? Yeah. I mean, I try to go to the bathroom. If I have to go to my bathroom like 2, 3, 4 times sometimes, and I don't like flush the toilet, just because, I mean, it's water, and we're contaminating our water, and we need the water, and we need the soil, and we need the air. So to me, it was just like, wow, like we're doing so many things wrong, and we have to teach people how to live without all this stupid necessities that we don't really need. Like all the kids can pee outside. I mean, it's amazing how, like all the things. I created my own compost. I have it here. I planted my tomatoes. I have chiles, and then this year I had a plague, so all my fruit trees we had to take them off. But I mean, it's a huge process, and I think we should teach more, and you should talk more about your experience with people, because now it's a necessity. It's not just like a cool hippie style way of living, but it's a necessity now.
Right. Yeah. Wow. That's a beautiful experience you've had, that transition to that. I love hearing that. I truly believe that we need it to, you know, look, if we're looking into our future as, you know, whether it's a community, a country, a society, a culture, there's not a lot of I don't know, plans, I guess, that you know, address being sustainable into the future. So it's really awesome to hear that experience you've had. Where did you say that was?
So we went to Bacalar, right in the peninsula de Yucatan.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, like 6-7 hours away from Cancun. But they want to build hotels, and we went there to well, like to make awareness in the community that people should not let industries to go build hotels, because it's the second largest lagoon in the whole world, and it's not contaminated yet. So we went to the community and we spoke to people. Actually, the guy that owns the lands, he wanted to build a huge hotel, and we showed him the way. And at the very last day, he cried and he was like, I didn't know, like, I'm getting chills. He was like, I didn't know, like, I could build cabins out of with bio construction materials. I didn't know we could do all these amazing things, and about the toilets. I mean, and he was like, and I was going to destroy so much part of the lagoon. And I mean, at the end, just if we were able to switch one mentality, it was just like more than enough, you know?
It's huge. That's huge. Yeah. And that's what our mentality is. You know, that's what our economy says. If you have a piece of property, it's almost worth more if you take a machine and scrape it clean so someone can build on it. That's, unfortunately, that's, you know, how we think as development, right? Growth means more, right? But maybe growth doesn't mean more.
Claudia, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. So going back to the cultural aspect, I think people forget that we didn't always live like this with electricity and water and, you know, with electronics and cars. You know, we did fine for thousands of years without all of that. Yes, it's convenient. Yes, we can, you know, we have each other, we can connect to each other, you know, being miles away, for example, now through, you know, technology and stuff, but they're not necessary. And I think, you know, disconnecting and going back to our roots is healthier than how humans are living now, or the majority of humans are living now, or in these first world countries. You know, I think there's more addiction and illness in first world countries than there are in third world countries, you know, depression and things like that. And I think it's just, there's a huge disconnect. There's a huge disconnect. And permaculture is those way of living, like trying to take you a few steps, not backwards, but more to get you to connect, to get humans to connect to where we naturally come from, where we naturally should be. You know, so
I love that you're using those words. Yeah, connect and disconnect. I think those are really powerful words.
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting from your talk, from everything you've said, and the diagram.
Awesome.
Can you send that to us so that we can share it when
yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for being here. As Anna said, we honor your time and the energy you gave to us today.
Thank you so much to you guys. I mean,
I want to have you back. Hopefully give us a talk about your house in depth.
yeah, I could go like a little more specific and try to, instead of being so general. But I want to say thank you so much to all of you, because what you're doing is a part of this. You know, it might not be one thing specifically, but by putting your voices out there and putting other people's voices out there for, you know, a better tomorrow is a part of it. You know, permaculture is a community thing. It's a community effort.
Thank you so
Just
much.
like, yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you.